Why does the UFC not seem to have mega fights anymore? You'll remember we used to have all these huge matchups. New fans would tune into the sport. Hardcores would talk for months and months about matchups that were coming. UFC 300, Max Holloway knocked out Justin Gaethje. The camera panned to Ilia Topuria. That was the fight to make. It was all anybody talked about. They said it was going to happen at UFC 306, that the co-main event would be Sean O'Malley and Merab. Ended up not happening. They moved it to 308. They stacked the undercard for it, put it in Abu Dhabi. Everybody was excited for that fight. We had the Alex Pereira matchups against Israel Adesanya. Even back in the day, we had Conor McGregor and Khabib. We've had all these big fights, and we don't see that anymore. And I think the reason is because the UFC and Dana White and ESPN majorly screwed up the mega fights between John Jones and Islam Makhachev. I think if Islam and Ilia had fought, all of a sudden, whoever had won that fight, they would be a lot more hype right now. And I understand Ilia Topuria is probably the most hyped fighter in the sport. But just imagine if he had moved up and beat Islam Makhachev. Or imagine if Islam had beat Ilia, somebody who was thought of as the greatest knockout artist in the lower weight classes. And all of a sudden, Islam pulls a win out over him. People would probably start referring to him as the GOAT. And now that they're not fighting, Islam's moving up to 170 to fight Jack Della Maddalena. It just seems that should be a big matchup. On paper, that is a big matchup because Jack Della Maddalena has a lot of fans. He's an interesting fighter. He's like a bigger, more skilled Dustin Poirier. He was able to defend all of Belal's takedowns, or he didn't defend the takedowns, but he was able to easily get back up, which does provide some evidence he would be able to sustain the grappling of Islam Makhachev. And it just doesn't feel like that big of a fight, even though I see a lot of people picking JDM to beat Islam. And that would be Islam's first, I know he has a loss, but it would be his first real loss in the UFC. And it's a month away, and people aren't really talking about it. What I was saying earlier about the Max Holloway-Ilia fight, people were talking about that 4 months ahead of time. People were complaining that it wasn't happening at UFC 306. And it just seems like if these fights had happened that we were all hyped for, we would have more hype fights opened up. I think Charles Oliveira versus Ilia, if Ilia had just been coming off a win over Islam, that would have been the most hype fight in the UFC. And now we have him versus Arman. That's a good fight. That's a great fight. That's the fight I want to see, but I don't think that's the fight the fans want to see. I don't think that Arman has a lot of fans after what he did at UFC 311, pulling out of the fight with 1 day's notice. And it looks like Arman is going to fight Dan Hooker now, so Justin Gaethje versus Ilia Topuria, that doesn't have any hype on it. I think Justin Gaethje has lost a lot of fans recently, and I'll be the first to say it. I know it's bad to say horrible things about these lightweights that have been fighting forever. If you say anything wrong about Justin Gaethje or Dustin Poirier or Dan Hooker, you're casual, but I think Justin Gaethje has lost a lot of fans recently because of what he's been saying about if he doesn't get a title shot, he'll retire, saying he deserves it more than anyone else in the division. I genuinely think Dan Hooker deserves a title shot more than Justin Gaethje does. And I'm not very hyped for a fight between him and Ilia Topuria. And, we have Alex Pereira fighting tomorrow. We saw a Chama chant at the press conference, but it wasn't really on Instagram. You had to actually watch the press conference to see it. And it just seems like the fight isn't hype at all. And if you think back to 6 months ago when they fought for the first time, him and Magomed, this was the big fight in the light heavyweight division. Alex Pereira fans were going crazy. I remember being at UFC 307 in Salt Lake City. People freaked out when he walked into the room. He was the biggest star in the sport. I think Alex Pereira used to be a huge star. He was synonymous with the sport of MMA. And now he's just kind of, people think of him as if he's washed, as if he wasn't arguably the greatest fighter in the sport 6 months ago. People were ranking him top 3 all time, or not top 3 all time, top 3 pound for pound, putting him over Khabib all time, which I'll say I never put him above Khabib. I thought that was a ridiculous argument. It just seems like he's lost a lot of hype. Merab in the co-main event, he's on an absolute tear. Nobody's really talking about that fight either. It just seems like UFC 320 is going under the radar, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This should be the most hype card probably of the year. I think this is better than UFC 314. I think UFC 314 was actually really overhyped. I think it's better than UFC 311, arguably. I think if Arman Tsarukyan had stayed on that card, it would have been the best card of the year, but since Arman pulled out, I think this is a better card. Just objectively on paper when you look at it. and it's not receiving the hype that it deserves. And I think it's just the UFC had all these opportunities to make mega fights, but they let them fall through, and now nothing they do is going to make the fans get hyped for anything. Nothing's going to feel as big as a John Jones Tom Aspinall fight. They're trying to bring Conor McGregor back to the White House. Everybody's pissed in the Instagram comment sections. Nobody wants to see him come back. And so it's like, what is the big matchup that the UFC could make? Because if you think back to 6 months ago, it was Islam versus Ilia. It was John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. John Jones is now retired. Islam has moved up to 170. Ilia has to defend his belt at lightweight. Neither of those matchups are possible anymore. And it's just like, what's the next best thing we could see? Pantoja versus Joshua Van, maybe? That's hype, but it's not hype enough to open up a main, or to be the main event of a main card. It's going to be in the co-main event, probably with a welterweight matchup or a middleweight matchup. So is it really that hype if it can't be in the main event? It just seems like we don't have any big fights that we can do. And the thing is, we have good fights. The sport is getting better. The fighters are getting better. Talent is going up. More viewers are coming into the sport. Now that Peacock is buying the sport of UFC, all of a sudden there's going to be a lot more viewers. It's going to be a lot cheaper. Hold on, give me one moment. All right, I'm back. I had to take a call, but look, Jiri Prochazka is probably the most marketable fighter in the UFC, and the UFC is just continuing to screw up his fights. I saw Lucas Tracy talking about this. They should be making a 2-hour documentary about him living in the Czech Republic, training with samurais, fighting in... Where did he fight before? He's fought in Reign Championship. Coming to the UFC, knocking out Dominick Reyes. He should have a 2-hour documentary of his path to the belt. And instead, we just have him doing interviews with Nina Drama. Nobody likes Nina. And Khalil Rountree is marketable too. So Jiri Prochazka versus Khalil Rountree should be a huge fight. This is arguably the biggest fight that could be in the sport right now. And there's just not enough hype around it. Khalil Rountree, he was 300 pounds. He was on the brink of suicide. He gets in fantastic shape, comes to the UFC. He worked his way up to a title shot, took 2 rounds off of Alex Pereira. He gained a ton of fans. Now he's fighting in a number 1 contenders matchup against probably the biggest fan favorite in the sport besides Alex Pereira. And at this point, it's arguable that Jiri is above Alex. And nobody is talking about the fight. Jiri Prochazka and Khalil Rountree Jr. is such an interesting stylistic matchup because they're both strikers. They're both KO artists. They're probably 2 of the most beautiful strikers in the division. When you're taking away Alex Pereira, I prefer Khalil Rountree's type of striking to Alex because Alex, he has very glory kickboxing, 1-2, check hook. It is entertaining. He has a lot of power in his hands. I think that's why he's the most entertaining, actually. It's because of the threat that if one left hook connects, if one knee up the middle connects, you're going out cold. But with Khalil Rountree, he's just very entertaining. He'll go all in on a big swinging right hand. He'll stomp on your knee. He'll try to break your leg. And Jiri Prochazka, we've seen major improvements in his game. You'll remember in the second Alex Pereira fight when his head movement didn't exist. He had the ponytail, and so anytime he tried to move his head, the ponytail would move with it. Alex Pereira could pick up on those signals. He shaved his head. He went out against Jamahal Hill at UFC 311, and he demonstrated that he's really worked on his head game. He has improved striking. His defense is 10 times better than it was in the first Alex Pereira fight. It's much better than it was in the second one. And he's just an overall improved fighter. I think he's going to beat Khalil Rountree. I think it's going to be a close matchup. I think it's definitely closer than Jiri and Jamahal was. But I think it's closer than Khalil versus Jamahal was. I think Jamahal was never that good of a fighter. I think he was arguably the worst champion in the sport in modern history. And Jiri Prochazka, what I'll say about him, he does a good job of marketing himself, but the UFC has done him dirty. They have not marketed him to his full potential. It's the same with Khalil Rountree. And this is all Dana White's fault. It's because they're putting too many eggs in one basket. Or they're putting too many eggs in too many different baskets, okay? Dana White, he's all focused on UFC Jiu-Jitsu now, which is getting 5,000 views on every video. It's not at all worth the money they're putting into it. They have all these different podcasts running. Dana's trying to do Power Slap. He wants to set up a kickboxing organization. Dana White is the UFC promoter. He owns the UFC, or at least he's in charge of the UFC. All he should worry about is the UFC, its fighters, and its fight cards. That is the only things that Dana White should be worrying about. He can pay other people to go run Power Slap. Instead, he's meddling his hands in boxing. He seems to care more about boxing than he does about the UFC because there's more money in it. But there would be more money in the UFC if he would just focus on his own sport and put some actual care into what he's doing with it. And you'll remember 6 months ago, I know it's been a while since I made a video. I've been busy. 6 months ago, I was talking about how Dana White doesn't care about matchmaking anymore. Dana White doesn't make good cards. And I don't think that's the case anymore. Let me scroll down on this card here. Alex Pereira versus Magomed, huge fight. Merab versus Sanhagen, huge fight. Jiri versus Khalil, huge fight. These are all big fights. We have Josh Emmett on the card, Joe Pyfer. These aren't the biggest fights. Abus Magomedov on a made card isn't the greatest look. But if you look at these first 3 fights here, you can slap whatever you want on the rest of this. I think later down here we have... this might be on a different card, actually. Patchy Mix is back. And he was a big prospect at one time. I just think we have arguably 2 of the most skilled fighters in their division. They're knockout artists. They have beautiful striking. And I think Dana White just doesn't care. I think that's why the UFC isn't promoting this. I think he's given the green light for too many different things. It's clear the UFC is spending their money on things that aren't the most important. It's clear whoever is running their media, I love the way they're running their YouTube account. Seems really good. They're posting knockouts daily. They're posting all these fights. Whoever's running the UFC's Instagram and TikTok needs to be fired. And I'm not saying that out of spite at all. I'm just saying there is bad marketing happening for the sport, and it's not going to gain fans at its potential, and it's not going to exceed its potential unless Dana White starts putting some actual effort into promoting his fighters, promoting his fights, and getting viewers to buy his cards. But let me know what you guys think about this fight. I'm really interested. This is probably the most hype I've been for a fight in the last few months. Maybe, honestly, since Volk fought Diego Lopez. This is the most excited I've been for a fight. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the next video.